Have you ever tried to learn a new language and found yourself frustrated and spinning your wheels? Thankfully, there is an entire field dedicated to how to learn languages efficiently. It's called second language acquisition. This is a subfield within linguistics, and one of SLA's stars is Paul Nation. And Paul Nation developed something called the 4 strands of language learning that will help anyone and everyone learn a language efficiently. So let's dive into it. Basically, we're going to talk about the 4 strands, how they relate to the 4 skills of language use, and 3 sources of knowledge. Really, this is more like ways of knowing, but I had to have an S, so strands, skills, sources, okay? So what are the 4 strands? The 4 strands, according to Paul Nation, are meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and fluency, okay? We're gonna go through each of these strands and how they relate to these 4 skills and the 3 sources in a second. So the 4 skills are reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And the 3 sources of knowledge, what we're gonna say is using meaningfully, using quickly, and explaining accurately. So those are our 3 sources of knowledge. I put them on the bottom here. Our 4 language skills are here, and our 4 strands of language learning are here. So everyone pretty much knows what these 4 are, these 4 language skills, okay? Reading, listening, writing, speaking. So we are gonna talk about some of the characteristics of those, but we're especially gonna relate them to these 4 strands, Paul Nation's 4 strands. So first, there is reading and listening, okay? Reading and listening are both input. You are not actually producing language when you read or listen. You are receiving language. In that sense, they are input. In terms of our sources of knowledge, okay, these are ways in which we are using language meaningfully. So reading and listening, we're using language meaningfully, and we have input. It's meaning-focused input. So in a classroom setting, right, or when you are trying to acquire a language, meaning-focused input might be something like reading a text that you know 98% of the words in. So this is kind of the classic example. It's called like extensive reading, right? To read a lot of texts that are on your level. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to learn new words that you didn't know previously and new syntactic constructions and all kinds of new things, as well as practicing old things. Okay, the reason why this is so crucial for language learning is that if all you did was output, you would never see anything new in a language. You could not learn a new word if all you ever had was output, because it is input, language material from an outside native speaker, that allows you to learn something new or novel. So in language learning, when we have meaning-focused input, we want to be using the language meaningfully, doing the skills of either reading or listening. So another distinction between reading and listening is that reading is text-based and slower, okay? So in listening, words are coming at you very, very fast. And if you miss a word or 2 or 3, you've missed probably that whole sentence, and there's nothing you can do to get it back. Unless you say, hey, stop, can you please tell me that again? Reading is different in that you go at your own pace. So that is gonna be significant as we move on to talk about other sources of knowing. So next, using language meaningfully in meaning-focused output. So the 2 skills associated with this are writing and speaking. So when you're writing, again, it is like reading in that you go at your own pace. Speaking is also similar in that you can go at your own pace, but usually in a conversation, there is a sort of expected pace at which to go. If you are fumbling over your words all the time, most native speakers are not gonna have the patience to talk with you. But there's still a distinction, right? Writing, you can go however fast you want. No one is sitting there telling you to go faster when you're practicing it for language acquisition. So the thing about meaning-focused output that's very, very helpful is that it forces you to use language in a way that requires access to long-term memory. So what do I mean by that? Basically, when I have to search my mind for a word, let's say the word river, I have to know that word really well and has to be stored in long-term memory in order for me to produce it. Now, if I hear a sentence like the boat was sailing down the river, in that case, I can use context clues for with the boat and sailing and what I know about those kinds of things to figure out more or less what the river means, even if I don't really know the word river that well. Why is that important? Well, for me to practice and really know river really, really well, I need to be able to output it. I need to be able to use it with my own sentence and know what kinds of context it belongs in. So that's a key distinction between meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output, is that output is going to require you to know the lexical item or part of the language better than input. And that is why it's so important, and that's why it's so helpful. When you have to use it actively, either in writing or speaking, it not only requires you to know it better, but it helps you to know it better in the long run. The more practice you can have with output, the faster you will acquire the lexical items or the syntactic constructions or whatever part of the language you are trying to acquire. So with meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output, we are obviously using the language meaningfully, okay? So that is kind of our source of knowledge or our way of knowing the language. So when I say something like, I know French, normally what we mean by that is I can engage in one of the 4 skills at least, and I can do so in a meaningful way. So I could speak in French, okay? That's usually what we mean by that. But there are other ways of knowing, okay? And language-focused learning is one of these other ways. So in particular, with language-focused learning, a lot of times it's about explaining language accurately. This is often what we have in traditional language classrooms where you are learning, for example, about a particular word and how to explain the grammar of that word. So we can go back to the word river. River is a noun, okay? A very basic part of the grammar, but it's something that actually you don't have to know in order to use the word river. These are 2 completely separate skills. How do we know this? Well, my 2-year-old knows the word river and points at rivers and says river, right? He can use that word meaningfully, but he does not know what a noun is, and he definitely doesn't know that river is a noun, okay? So these 2 are actually 2 separate skills, and you don't need one for the other. Likewise, I can say, I know something about, a particular French verbal form, the passé composé, for example, but I don't know French, okay? So don't ask me any French questions, don't ask me to speak French, but I've, read an article or 2 about this particular verbal form in French, and so I can maybe explain this verbal form accurately without being able to use it meaningfully. So what does that mean? Do I know it? Well, I know something about it, right? I know it in this way. I don't know it in this way. All right, so this is what we mean by language-focused learning. Most people think about it as explaining language accurately. However, Paul Nation actually mentions some things that are closer to using language meaningfully within language-focused learning. For example, vocabulary flashcards. Are vocabulary flashcards meaning-focused input or output? Well, not really. In the sense that you're not really using the language meaningfully in the same way as you are when you're reading a text, for example. But doing flashcards and committing a word like river to long-term memory through flashcards facilitates meaning-focused input and output. So if I can use flashcards to learn the word river better, then when I come across it in my reading, for example, in input, or when I hear it, I might know what the meaning is, right? Or if I go to use it in a sentence, maybe I remember it better if I practice it with flashcards. So there's a sense in which language-focused learning can kind of be, or at least facilitate, using language meaningfully. And there's a sense in which it's really just about explaining things accurately. Again, if I am using flashcards, right, and the only thing I do is associate the word river with a picture of a river, what I'm doing is I'm facilitating this level of knowing and not this at all. I'm not learning that it's a noun, right? I can put that in my flashcard, right? I can say, well, every time I see this, I'm gonna remember that river is a noun. That's fine. But those are two separate skills, okay? So when we talk about language-focused learning, we can talk about ways in which this could facilitate language use or facilitate talking about the language, the grammar specifically. Now, finally, fluency. Being fluent in a language is sort of the holy grail of language progress, right? And this is the question that everyone asks if you say you're learning a language. They'll say, are you fluent? So what I try to explain to people is that it really just depends on what you mean by that. So I'll give an example. I studied in Israel, lived there for 5 years, right? I got pretty good at modern Hebrew, okay? I took classes in modern Hebrew, I could carry on conversations, gave presentations, etc., okay? But I only a few times had to go to the mechanic in Hebrew. And let me tell you, when you are telling me words in Hebrew that I really don't understand in English, I don't really know car parts that well in English. I'm not gonna understand basically anything you're saying to me in Hebrew as you're trying to explain what's wrong with my car. So the issue is that you can be fluent in different domains, okay? So you can be fluent when it comes to, for example, linguistics. So balshanut is the modern Hebrew word for linguistics. I was pretty good at, I took classes in the linguistics department and they were taught in modern Hebrew. I was pretty good at talking about linguistics in Hebrew, but I wasn't good at talking about car parts in Hebrew, okay? So whenever we talk about what fluent is, right, we first have to talk about what domain are we discussing, okay? What domain of the language? Even in my own native language, English, right? This is true for everyone. There are certain sectors that are very difficult for us to understand because of all the technical vocabulary and various complexities involved in entering that domain. One immediately thinks of the medical field, for example. There are many medical papers that I couldn't really understand because I don't have the vocabulary knowledge. Ultimately, it's about vocabulary knowledge to understand those texts, okay? So that's one thing. Secondly, you can be fluent in the different skills. And just because you're fluent in one skill doesn't necessarily mean you are fluent in another, okay? So reading and writing, as we've said, I have this blue line here. What makes them different is you are going at your own pace. You dictate the pace, okay? That being said, you can be a fluent reader or a fluent writer of a language. And there is a sort of, objective standard by which we can measure, for example, reading fluency. It would be how many words can you read per minute? Now, this really gets at the heart of what fluency is. Fluency presupposes that you're using language meaningfully, but it's not the same as focusing on meaning. There is also, very crucially, a component of pace, words per minute, right? So we're trying to not only use it meaningfully, but use it quickly. And this is what makes fluency different from all the rest, okay? So when we're focusing on meaning-focused input or meaning-focused output, it's all just about understanding the message. And there's a certain required speed, especially for listening and speaking, because the speed will be the pace at which the conversation is happening. But with reading and writing in particular, where you're going at your own pace, there is no sort of required speed. So in theory, you could be reading a text quite slowly, trying to understand the meaning, but you're not really focusing on fluency, on getting faster at reading. So the reason why this strand in particular is so important is that it helps you to actually understand texts better or whatever you're doing. Language normally is conducted at a certain speed. So when we talk, some people talk faster than others. I am probably guilty of talking too fast sometimes. When we talk, we expect input or output to come at a certain pace. When we read, we kind of expect to be reading at a similar-ish pace. In fact, even sometimes a little bit faster because we're not having to pronounce everything. So that being said, what studies have shown is that being able to read faster contributes to more meaning being extracted from the text. You can understand a text better by getting faster at reading. So listening and speaking are one of the best ways to build fluency because, again, they require you to go quickly. So there are two main conditions that have to be present in order for an activity to be a fluency activity, okay? So one is some sort of pressure to go faster, and two, the material needs to be easy. Paul Nation has a whole section on this and he goes into more detail, but those are the two main things. So for example, if you want to become a fluent speaker of French, okay, what you need to do is time yourself. If there's no time, then there's no pressure to go faster. So you might try to, for example, tell a story in 4 minutes and then tell it again in 3.5 minutes and tell it again in 3 minutes. And what you're trying to do is not learn new information, right? You're not trying to produce new things. You're not actually focusing that much on the meaning, right? You are, it's presupposed, but what you're actually trying to do, the goal is to use it quickly, right? And so when you do something like this, when you do this kind of drill, the whole point is that it should be, again, fast and easy material. So something that you can speak about freely, and you know the vocabulary in that domain, you know the sort of syntactic constructions that you need. What you're trying to do is speed up the process by which you retrieve words in your long-term memory and output them in speaking. And that's sort of the key to fluency, is you're working on things you already know, things that are easy, and you are getting faster at them. You're basically making it to where, when you're in that conversation, right, with a real person, you can speak quick enough to hold a conversation. So again, with listening, this is very easy to do, right? Especially with all the audio resources we have, right? You can slow things down, you can speed things up. If you're like me, you can listen to podcasts on 2.5 times speed, and you can get really fast at listening, okay? Or if you're learning a new language, you can listen to something on half speed, right? And then slowly increase the speed at which you are listening to something. Reading and writing are very similar in that they can be sped up or slowed down. But again, what's different is that you are dictating that pace. There are sort of expected norms of how fast should you be reading. There's a certain number of words per minute, right? That's sort of standard. And so what you can do is you can do the same kind of drill with reading as we did with speaking. You can read a passage, you can time yourself, you read a passage again, time yourself, read a passage again, time yourself, and you might target a certain words per minute to reach in order to get more fluent at the skill of reading. So those are the 4 strands of language learning according to Paul Nation. Meaning-focused input, which are reading and listening. Meaning-focused output, which are writing and speaking. Language-focused learning, which either facilitate using the language meaningfully or explaining it accurately. And then there is fluency, which is all about using language quickly, practicing what you already know, what you already can use meaningfully, and doing so in a way that facilitates speed. So Paul Nation recommends that these 4 strands of language learning are basically evenly distributed in a language classroom or when you are trying to learn a language. So 25% of your time should be on meaning-focused input, 25% of your time on meaning-focused output, 25% here and 25% here, okay? That is one way to do it. If you want to get better at a certain piece of a language, right? If you want to get better at using language meaningfully or using language quickly, this sort of framework gives you the ability to evaluate your own language learning and to tweak it so that you are better or not as good, right, at certain skills. Okay, and it's all about these skills: reading, listening, writing, and speaking. So with this framework, you have the tools to construct your own language learning plan to facilitate your own learning. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.